greet here Professor of Russian Church History and Canon Law and Director of Undergraduate Study at Holy Trinity Orthodox Seminary in Jordanville, New York, Protodeacon Andrei Psarev. The history of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad has more than 100 years. Let's, if possible, try to characterize this story in large strokes.
I'm seeing two major strokes, two major divisions for the history of the Russian Church abroad. The one that starts in 1920 with Russian refugees moving in different directions, those who came over from Crimea as an outcome of the Civil War, and those who also moved across in Asian direction to China and so on. And this period lasted, I connected with the reports of Metropolitan Anastasia in 1964, and then there would be a period of Russian Church abroad as de facto autocephalous church, which is termed with Metropolitan Philaret, and lasted until 2007. So in the first period, there was a big trauma that Russian people experienced. So that was, but at this time, in this first period, Metropolitan Anastasia, Metropolitan Anthony, the first hierarch of the Russian Church abroad, they didn't do anything like glorifying saints. They were focusing on just preserving their church liturgical lives, preserving their flag. And then why I'm calling the second period after Cephalus, that basically Russian Church abroad started to do everything, like canonizing saints, receiving clergy from other jurisdictions, and this lasted until 2007. Yeah.
Tell us about the most prominent representatives of the Record from your point of view. Bishops, priests, other representatives of the clergy and laymen who have had the greatest, in your opinion, influence.
I have to start with Metropolitan Anthony Khrapovitsky, who was the founder of the Russian Church abroad, the first hierarch. So he was really big on the Russian scale in the Russian pre-revolutionary church. And it's not just because I'm saying this because he is related to Russian Church abroad. I think there is whole consensus regarding his importance. So he was one very charismatic man who was born to be a monk. And he tonsured like the whole generation of Russian bishops. And he really was very zealous about promoting monasticism, and not always successfully. So some of the people would basically start to walk on waters toward him, and then they realize, no, I cannot do it. They start to drown. So some of them really end up tragically. But at the same time, that's how he was. He would break all protocol regarding how to deal with students, because he would invite, it was Russian Empire, everything's supposed to follow by book. You don't really socialize with students if you are like a rector of the seminary. He didn't really care about all this. He would invite students for tea. He would run into constant problems with Russian ecclesiastical bureaucracy based on this. And then also he was a man behind of restoration of patriarchate in the Russian church. So he believed in strong church and in the strong Russian state. So he really believed in monarchy, and that's something that became a divisive issue, because he brought this in diaspora, and he argued that monarchy is not really a political concept, but this is a set of mind. And this became a divisive issue, because actually not everyone would subscribe to this, and then he would support also professional monarchists. And also he was a big theologian, but not everything in his theology is, how to say, absolute, because he, as all of us, was a product of his time, and he was growing up in time of very strong positivism, when basically people of his generation, they were falling away from church because basically they would challenge, can you prove your faith? Can you prove that actually Christ is God? So if you cannot really prove it, I mean, why actually you waste your time, right? And Dostoevsky was a rescuer for Metropolitan Antony's generation, because he really, really successfully challenged those percepts. So Metropolitan Antony became very much in moral unpacking of doctrine. So he kind of was leaning toward moral dimension, and when he was talking about Christ redemption, he really focused like on Gethsemane, and then it became like divisive again. Also, not everyone would agree with his interpretation of what happened in Gethsemane and so on. So I'm saying that he was a big caliber, but in Russian diaspora, everything was absolutized about him, and that's, in my opinion, became a problem. Like, people really look at him, that whatever he did was kind of, that's how we should do. Whereas if he would stayed in Russia, there were other bishops of closer caliber, and he would be counterbalanced. But for us, he became like the only basically teacher. So I'm not sure if he would be happy with this, but that's reality. And that's basically what happened. But I give him all what I said, but then actually my heart goes with Metropolitan Anastasi. So I kind of really don't have like personal sort of, how to say, chemistry, whatever would be the word. But Metropolitan Anastasi, he was from younger generation of Russian hierarchs. All of them were trained in Russia. Metropolitan Antony, he was a nobleman who decided to become a monastic, which he didn't supposed to do, because Russia was class society, kind of, it was like caste, basically. If you are a priest, your children have very little chance to be other than, if they're male, other than clergy. So Metropolitan Anastasi, that was his story. And he was the man who designed enthronement of Patriarch Tikhon. He was very quiet, very thoughtful, very focused. There is one account when he was in Jerusalem, when he lived there in 1920s, that he was performing proscomedia, commemorating, and a huge lampada fall just next to his face and scratched him, and he continued. And he had like very strong intuition. Like in 1920s, Russian diaspora was cut off from Russia. So, and there was strong tendency in Russian diaspora, oh, we know better here than in Russia, we are in free world. And he always kind of was careful about doing things like that. So he kind of was humble. And also when most of the Russian Chebrod happened to be under Nazis and Axis powers, right, Nazis allies, he also, he said things that basically we now cannot really read and so on, but not to the extent he might have said. So I think he had really good insights, good feelings, and also was like a strong Christian leader for this Russian refugee flock. That's also, I think, important to understand, that Russian people, Russian Church abroad people, they were stateless. Most of them didn't have any citizenships. They have identification cards issued to them by the provision of Fridtjof Nansen, who was commissioner from the League of Nations, who issued those IDs for the Armenians who ran away from the genocide in the Ottoman Empire, and Russians who were stateless. So basically, church became the state for those people. And of course, the most outstanding example, that's what for me actually, whoever would say something about Russian Church abroad, right? That Russian Church abroad is this or that, schismatic and canonical, you name it. I will bring this person to the icon of St. John of Shanghai. Because St. John of Shanghai, he became a universal saint, like St. Seraphim of Sarov. I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that there are Orthodox who don't venerate him. I will be surprised. I will be surprised. I mean, if there is, because he became so universally loved, And that really shows that Russian Church abroad is Church of Christ, right? So, and he came to the city of Shanghai, that was internationally governed city, with British district, with the French district, with the British administration, with the French administrations, and Russians were laughing stock. So they were demoralized, they didn't know what to do, and he became for them both mother and father. Yes, it was difficult. Those who lived with St. John, like clergy, he was very peculiar, that everyone should be well before the time, before service starts, because he was in his own way communicating with God. So people cannot really relate to this, but he was very demanding regarding this. So I think as a clergyman, it might be difficult. If even like an acolyte, it might be difficult to be around him. But at the same time, he would spend nights looking for someone. And then people who knew him, they would say, I went to confession to St. John, and he said to me particularly, don't go there, don't do that, because ABC would happen to you. And I went against his word, and this ABC happened to me. I went to confession, and he never said, remember I told you that? No. He was like a prodigal son father. And like prodigal son father knew that the son is going to waste his fortune. He perfectly knew this. Nevertheless, he gave him whatever he was asked. But when he was coming back, he didn't say, so here you go. Didn't I tell you that basically it's all going to happen to you? So that's how St. John was. And for me, St. John is the best of the Russian Church abroad. So like there is Troparion for Holy Hierarch, and that's about him, about St. Nicholas, about St. John. Right. And then also there are clergy. There are clergy who were with their flag in most difficult circumstances, who were like good shepherds, who didn't leave their flag, who stayed behind, who lived in similar circumstances, and that's why they were looked after their flags. They were loved by their flag, because flags knew they are like us. They are basically share the same hardships, same difficulties. I may be a little bit idealizing, of course, saying this way. I think I'm, but nevertheless, let's say it would be like an icon of the Russian Church abroad, the best of the Russian Church abroad. So those clergy who stayed with similar circumstances with their flag, and that's another justification for Russian Church abroad existence, because those stateless, traumatized political refugees, they would not accept ministry from other people. I don't think other people would be suitable. And I'm not saying there are no problems with the Russian Church abroad. That's also, I'm not saying this, but there are problems with most of human organization. Most of, show me where there are no problems, right?
And what's always quite interesting is the first thing that the Russians did, no matter where they went, they established the church. That was the very first thing before anything else that they did. They established the church.
Yeah, that kind of helps also to restore the counties, because they lost their homeland, and church became very, not that way especially religious also, I would say, but church became very pivotal part of their, very important part of their identity. Because if you basically take away church, who am I? Who am I? What is my identity? So that's why basically some people would say, do you go to church or you go to under the church? Because there was a club, right? But it's still they would socialize around the church. Not the way, again, I also don't want to sell you a picture that they were like Holy Rules, and so everyone basically, it was like forgiving Sunday, every Sunday, that everyone would ask forgiveness and so on and so forth. No, they were real people, but church became very important part. And also you can see how there are problems connected with this, because also church became politicized. All of them were very politicized. And this was church of those politicized, traumatized people, right? That's also, I think, we need to keep in mind. So therefore, for bishops, it was very difficult to guide this flag because it was very, they sometimes would walking like through minefields because it was very divisive. There are constant scandals, constant reporting bishops to like synod, complaining about bishops, confronting bishops, almost like beating bishops. So again, those same people who erect those churches, right? Like the story goes, a Russian on this island, right, found himself as a result of shipwreck, and he's building one church, and then he builds another church. Why, Father Alexander? Why did he do this?
For those who are unhappy, they have no place to go.
The whole conversation, we need to go to talk about the other one, right? We cannot just talk about rock or you see.
Could you say, Father, that Metropolitan Anthony was more romantic, whereas Metropolitan Anastasi was more pragmatic?
I won't be able to say this, but I think regard all those like fallacies that I mentioned of Metropolitan Anthony, they were counterbalanced by his real pastoral love. Because he might be like narrow-minded in his ecclesiology, his approaches, but when his opponent, Metropolitan Evlogi, came to Serbia, Metropolitan Anthony, who didn't really feel that he is guilty in anything, he asked Evlogi that Evlogi would read the prayer of absolution over him. And he was able, through this love, through this humility, to achieve reconciliation. And then very righteousness people, the Russian Church abroad, said to him, you really step out of your mandate, because the Council of the Russian Church abroad suspended Evlogi, and now you gave him absolution without consulting us. But if Metropolitan Anthony would have gone through all this, chain of command, he wouldn't achieve anything. So therefore, I think he was really outstanding, big caliber figure. Yeah. But Metropolitan Anastasi, he was more close type. He wasn't really that outgoing. He didn't say anecdotes as Metropolitan Anthony would do, and so on. He was more diplomatic, definitely. But he spent years in Constantinople, newly conquered by Entente powers, right, in 1920. Then he spent years in the British-controlled Palestine. Then he spent years in Yugoslavia as a free Yugoslavia and Yugoslavia under Nazis. And then he went to America, bringing the Kursk icon here in 1950. Basically, the whole life committed to the Russian Church abroad.
You mentioned about monarchist idea of Metropolitan Anthony,
right.
And you mentioned that some Russians did not support it at that time. Was it inherited to a civil war in Russia?
Well, what happened that we had 1917-1980 council, right, that restored patriarchate. And then the center of Russia, Moscow and St. Petersburg, happened to be under the Bolsheviks. And Russia is still very centralized, so the Bolsheviks were able to control the whole country by controlling those centers. And territories beyond front lines where the whites were, that's where church was able to exist freely. So there were two councils, one in Tomsk in 1918, another in Stavropol in 1919. In those councils, they really did their very best to minimally talk about any politics. Even like there was civil war, but they really wanted to minimalize anything and not mentioning monarchy at all. But in diaspora, there was kind of like homework when they found themselves in 1921 in Serbia. They started to think, why did Russia collapse? That was kind of like, I had at dinner one lady from San Francisco, and she was half Russian and half Italian. And she was saying, when my Russian family would get together, they would weep, drink, and say bye. And when my Italian half of the family would get together, they would just have jolly time, and they would laugh, and they would dance, and whatever. So that's kind of Russian story. So the Russians, they were thinking about all this. But I think Russian Church Abroad gave an answer to this, saying that because Russian people, like Israelites, they stray away from God passes and God punishes them. It's fair enough for bishops, but they really were in denial at looking for social, political reasons that resulted in Russian Revolution. Kind of, they would rather indulge to conspiracy theories, like there were Jews, there was also those people who contributed to the collapse of the Russian Empire, without looking holistically on the whole picture. And that's where we are still right now. We're really still very much in denial. We don't want to recognize that the Soviet period of history is still Russian history. Because in Russian Church Abroad, those who grew up in Russian Church Abroad, it's painful issue to talk about. Some people they totally ignore it. They don't know what to make out of this. So, and that's what I think was problem that was connected with this, basically, with those events, in my opinion.
But look at 70 years, 80 years later, that through the change that Russia went through to where it is now. So it had to occur. It had to occur.
It's like, to me, it would be like actually ignoring the Mongol rule over Russia. Yeah. Kind of saying, the Mongol rule was not Russia. Right. No, it's all, yes, exactly as you said. I'm not idealizing, God forbid, the Soviet period, but I'm just against basically denying this is Russian history. So that's all I've been saying.
In its history, the Russian Orthodox Church abroad has gone through many stages. Are there any figures, accurate or approximate? How has the overall number of record parishioners changed throughout the years?
No, we don't do figures in Russian Church Abroad. Okay, we don't have them. So I wish actually our bishops would get some statistics, basic statistics. There is one gentleman in California, Alexander Krindich, who actually collected some statistics, but I still could not believe, because he was convincing me, saying that I got all data from all parishes of Russian Church Abroad, which for me totally impossible. I could not believe that all parishes in America submitted to him data. So he hasn't converted me. He hasn't converted me on this, but nevertheless, that's what he told me, that I got all data from all parishes. So according to him, Russian Church Abroad, right, all churches, Orthodox churches were shrinking, or have been shrinking. So, but Russian Church Abroad shrinking less, and also Russian Church Abroad were opening more missions than others. I think Antiochians were ahead of everyone in this sense, but Russian Church Abroad was not doing too bad. And actually, according to him, again, I respect the person, but he came with a number of 23,000 for America, or Russian Church Abroad. Again, I don't know what his criteria, if he went just by those people who are registered, or those people, what exactly, those whom he meant, like regular communicants, people who just, show up at liturgy. So, but this is the best I can answer.
Russian Orthodox Church Abroad is considered one of the most, let's say it politely, not rich Orthodox churches in North America.
That's true.
Meanwhile, the Russian-speaking Orthodox community has never been considered an economic outsider in the United States. From your point of view, Father Andrei,
right.
What is the reason for this situation?
Maybe we didn't come out from this refugee mindset, basically. I think our upper management, our bishops, they could address basically a flag saying maybe they should revisit parish dues. Maybe they should use something different, like because people who come from the former Soviet Union, they don't want to enroll in parishes. Maybe sort of some other, like in Stuttgart in Germany, priest was saying that I said to my parish, okay, if you want to have 2 priests ministering the whole area, we need this amount of money. Can you basically do like monthly PayPal? So kind of will break the sum among all of us. but there we can count on your donations. And people understood this language. They don't understand why they should enroll in parish in good old-fashioned rocker style, but they understood that it takes money. So maybe we should really set up some kind of, I don't know, work classes or whatever, workshops, that's the word, yeah. So because I think we unnecessarily do that poor. I mean, we could do better.
What about other Orthodox churches? Do you have any information about what other Orthodox churches do?
What I think affected us also is the same as the Russian Revolution. Like Greeks, they have. It's also important that Greece is the only official Orthodox country in the world. Like Russia, officially still secular country. I think Georgia is officially secular country, but in Greece there is no separation between the church and state, and Orthodoxy always was part of their identity. They always try to keep law of God and so on, and as a result. Church is much more connected with the idea of Greekness. So I think it's more like also like, put a penny, take a penny, okay, you kind of give your whatever, like 10,000 maybe in a year or something, but if you lost job, so you can come to your papas, to your priest, and say, listen, do you know a diner or whatever? So, and you expect that he would make phone calls for you. Again, not being insider, that's my understanding. But with Russians, it's different, yeah.
And to kind of do, but that's just the immigrant mentality. And so, and the idea of memberships, again, that's very foreign to the Russian church. No such, and what do you mean a membership? To kind of do that. It's just it's a Russian mentality. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Serbs will give, Greeks will give, Antiochians will give. Russians? Well, I give at the church, what more you want? I buy a prosvata, what more do you want? And to kind of do that. It's just, and it's cultural. It's a very cultural thing. For salaries for priests, that's for Russians, Bosco, you're doing okay, you working, you fine, you don't need to kind of do that. So there's a whole part of that mentality that occurs. And then, of course, the priest realizes, he sees people are working and kind of doing all that, they're in church, they kind of do that, and then it's money issue is not a money issue. The church will survive to kind of do that. And for here, I'm very thankful for the community here that, we paid off our property here. And to kind of do that was now we're saving and working to hopefully build a church. But those are very, and so everybody has a goal. So do I want to have dues? When I was growing up in San Francisco, people were paying like $5 a year, and they did that, and $5 a year to be a member of the cathedral in San Francisco was like, when I left, I was in my 20s, and they were still paying $5 a year, so, and to kind of do that. So, but it is a mentality. I think it's more of a mentality than anything else. And it was never passed on to give. That was just not part of. We don't talk about money. Absolutely not. And that's part of ROCOR thing. We don't talk about money.
It's even been praised, it's even been praised, but basically saying, that's why we don't really have people who come here because of money. So kind of the whole ethos was, yeah.
Do you think from the historical and your practical point of view, Father Alexander, is it that the Russian concept of one major sponsor who comes and builds the cathedral, and we are just a small people running around, and here is $1 for you, and this is my monthly donation, right? So do you think it's kind of the close idea, or I am exaggerating here?
Yeah, they're waiting for that. Everybody's waiting for that person to come. We've read we've read about it. I mean, actually, think about it. I mean, we pick up the books and we read these things on monasteries and people coming, and you have a status there and everything, and somebody sees and he dies and he builds this huge monastery. He gives all his money to the monastery, builds a monastery, builds a church. Yeah, we're still waiting.
Right. I mean, and my answer would be kind of not very, how to say, optimistic, because it also might come with strings attached. You're not necessarily, it depends on what terms this man shows up, right? If it's Father Alexander described it basically totally selflessly and so on, or basically there are some strings attached. It's also a question. It's also because, I mean, it should be really very clearly basically defined what's going on here, what is your donation, and basically what is your relationship with congregation and so on. I think that really has to be, if it's undefined, you are setting up maybe a time bomb.
Taking into account more than 2,000 years of history of Orthodox Church in general, and the history of Rokor in particular, how should an ideal church parish be run from the point of view of governance?
Well, I'm a backseat driver, so yes, I teach canon law and so, but I mean, I'm a deacon, so I cannot even get vested without a priest, right? I really auxiliarily. So therefore, I think I would like Father Alexander to hear, but before that, I just say what I think is important to understand what happens during liturgy, that we have this Christian race, Christian nation getting together, and all of us are ontologically the same. We all kind of were set up for Christian ministry in our baptism, and some of us are ordained for special service, like priests and deacons. But choir sends up responses on behalf of the whole congregation in kind of this interactions. There is no passive just observation, because if you are an outsider, you come to the church and you see, okay, there is some wall, there is a choir loft, and there is some people. So it kind of reminds me of theater. So, but it's not a theater, it's active engagement. I think if we talk about, if we explain to this is, listen, it's for you here. You are not passively, how to say, you're not just a passive observer. You are one of us. We are together. So that's not being a parish priest and being most of my life associated with the monastery, not being a monastic. That's the best I can take it, but I really would like to hear Otец Alexander on this.
The church is not pragmatic. The church is ideal. It's absolutely perfect. So that's we have to understand that when we come into the church, that everything inside the church is ideal. The altar table is ideal. Proscomedia is ideal. Confession is ideal. The prayers, the singing, that's ideal. No matter how bad it is to our ears, it's ideal. So the church is not pragmatic. Pragmatic leaves when we come in here. Pragmatic leaves when we have board meetings. Those become pragmatic, but anything inside the church, that has to be ideal. That's what we strive for. Every parishioner should walk out of the church after liturgy and be tired as everybody else. As the clergy, they should be praying just as hard for the priests, for our bishops, for people who are ill, to kind of do that. That's how we should leave the liturgy. Everybody should come in being so tired that they just sitting there and they just say, I just want to go home. I'm tired. And it's quiet. That is the pinnacle of how we should be as a community.
My question was about, the bridges, how we retain the main thing and don't throw a baby with the water, but still run things effectively. Is it possible? Because, we don't want to lose that ideal part which you were referring to, Father, but we still want to do, the management part right. And if we do, how we should do it? Or maybe history, and you better positioned to answer this question, you both. From the historical standpoint, this is mission impossible.
Is it the ideal thing, the best for the church, or is it pragmatic? And sometimes we get a little bit too pragmatic for practical rather than the ideal situation to kind of do that. I'm a bad administrator. So, but also at the same time, I have to be a good priest to listen to the people around me. We're going to have disagreements because that's who we are, you know, but at least we can come to some type of consensus to kind of do that. But ultimately at the end, that's the priest's decision. It's very, very important, at least for me, that when I have my committee meetings, we have disagreements, we walk out, we leave, there's no hard feelings, or there's no to kind of do all that. But at the same time is that we have to constantly to make sure that the people around to give advice to the priest is giving good advice.
But I think an ideal that you come and you really listen what church, because that's what deacon does. Deacon points your attention. We are now praying about this. We are praying about those who are oppressed, and we do pray about those who are oppressed. We are now praying about those who sail. And then Father, he reads all those beautiful, very powerful prayers, like St. Basil's prayers. And that's what happens. That's for the life of the world. And if we as parishioners realize this, we definitely would have very different level of engagement with our parishes, because we would feel how we benefit ourselves from being there, from spending this, having very, very extraordinary time, because it's really not much. When you don't get this, maybe it's really boring. You come to church, it's in Church Slavonic in foreign language, performance is poor, like there is no air conditioning, and so on and so on. So on, a kind of you are spending, you work maybe 40 plus hours a week, you are exhausted, and here we go again, and some priest not on the same page with you, like when you try to ask a question. But I think we need to get our own kick out of this, and this is our kick, right? When we realize this is our secret weapon. You need to be an idealist to come to a seminary, right? Yes. I mean, maybe we go to another extreme, and like a good dose of practicality is not going definitely too hard. But yes, at the end of the day, church, right? It's not transactional, whatever, you know.
Church is not transactional. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah. That's what people come for. That people expect, right? Everything transactional. They could go elsewhere, like to coach, I don't know, psychiatrists, so I mean, they would get better service maybe, but no, I mean, but church is church, right?
Over the last quarter of a century, there seemed to be a steady decline in persons' self-demand, growing tendency to compromise. What it is from your perspective? Merely historical fluctuation, which possibly will reverse, or otherwise disturbing phenomenon of the human change?
So I think on one hand, like modern society helps constantly points out that we need to there is whole idea of trauma, and we need basically people need to understand us, and it's also everything comes out from Christian kind of compassion. Our society, some people would say post-Christian, but it's still, despite the fact that society denies maybe this bond, this connection, is still very much permeated, influenced by Christianity. So to some extent, maybe it's good, but still value of confession. You come to confession and you focus on yourself. Yes, you might have your circumstances that really weigh against you all the way, but still, I mean, it helps you to focus on yourself. So I guess it's like combination of those things, but I'm the last man to start blaming society and speak about vices of society. I think we should maybe focus on all what we have, all what we get in our societies, how we benefit about having this freedom of speech and so on, and then we can focus on what we don't like, because I think it's common for our circles basically to speak about things that we don't like. So I guess that's, yeah, but we still, as the bottom line, we still to how to say, we still be kind to others and lenient to others, but we still kind of be, I guess, more harsh to ourselves. That's it.
You know, it's an American expression. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink. You can't do it. So when we walk into the church and we do everything, we don't look at the church as the kingdom of heaven on earth. We're very selfish and self-centered. And what can we get? The church tells you, it's very honest. If you go to services, the church tells you the history of the church. It tells you the life of a saint. It does all those things. But we're not listening. We don't hear. Because ultimately at the end, it's about what I want, not what God wants. Put it in a simple, as I said at Great and Holy Friday, we're not living how God intended us to be. So I'm not looking for the church. This is not the church can give you something, but I can't change you. That ultimately got to come from you. And at the end, it's usually a life experience that God gives you to help with that change.
Do you think there is a particular Holy Father work that best suited to be read by a modern man?
What comes to my mind, right, like in Jordanville, I think there was a still tradition of reading letters from Optina elders, right? Despite the fact they were monastics, right? They were very, they could relate to regular people's struggles, like St. Ambrose of Optina. There people were flocking to talk to him, and he spent time with one lady who was talking about her like ducks and problem with ducks, and he was listening, and somebody brought it up and say, listen, you know, is it really worth your time? And he responded, all life of this woman was in her ducks. So he could really relate. And I felt similar about Vladika Loros. I would come to Vladika Loros' office, and people wouldn't believe that he was typing up thank you letter for $5 to some lady. And for me, it was a lifelong lesson. There are no important people and non-important people. You don't segregate. You don't. So I was thinking, well, they're a really important business up to your level. You have these troubles and this problem. Why don't you really do this? Why don't you outsource it? So anyway, but I mean, your question was, I think letters of Optina, of fathers, yes. I mean, St. Ambrose letters. Those are ones who come to my mind because he dealt well with lay people. So, but I'm not very happy with my response. So I really need to read more. I'm more intellectual guy, and I'm not spiritual guy. And kind of this question really kind of puts us under spotlight. So that's it. I'm not bragging that I'm an intellectual guy or like false humility. I think something that helps us to be humble, right? To helps us, because now we deal with all those like sort of church politics issues, and people believe they need to take stands. It's really like important for have an opinion and so on. But I think whatever we do, it should be humble. And if you are a good scholar, doesn't matter if you are Orthodox, non-Orthodox, it's a trademark of a good scholar. This person understands that basically he's just a human. He's just a craftsman, regardless how many PhDs he has and so on. He understands he only learned whatever his lifespan allows him to learn. And I think this is a mark of basically quality. So whenever we say, if it's humble, then we can listen to this. If it's not humble, then maybe we don't have time for this. So whatever helps us to set up on this way. So we kind of, if we start with the rudder, if we start with this kind of literature, if we're really becoming like aggressive in this way, kind of, I would say what I call like Taliban style orthodoxy, you know, basically, then I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed with this. Okay, so that's the best I can deal with this.